The last video on this channel was about the 60s 8-man series, mainly focused on the anime and why you should watch it. This time we'll be looking at the 90s OVA follow-up 8-Man After. It's been covered before as a horrible, dark and gritty version of a once harmless, family-friendly children's series, which, if you've actually experienced the original manga and anime series, is hardly accurate. While having plenty of stories largely centered around light-hearted superheroic subject matter, it did not shy away from dark stuff. The original 60s Astro Boy anime refused to show the attempted suicide of Lord Deadcross from the manga when it adapted that arc, instead replacing it with a goofy, comical action scene, yet 8-Man went all the way with not just an attempted suicide, but a villain straight up killing himself. And that's not even the darkest it ever got. From what I've seen, that honor goes to the final story arc, which wasn't even adapted to English. The Bennett the Sage review also disingenuously left out a specific important scene in order to attack a plot hole that didn't even exist. So as usual, you shouldn't bother with his claims at all. With all that out of the way, is this a good anime? I'm not exactly sure, but I do consider it worth a look. The visuals and atmosphere are obviously its strongest point. The art direction is not exactly what I would have done with this OVA. I believe the perfect look would have been something akin to the Giant Robo OVAs, a style that really nails home the film noir appeal of the original show, while also modernizing it with an OVA budget. However, the style we did get is still pretty great, a sleek 90s look that's very polished and cool looking. The redesign of 8-Man looks great in both stills and in motion, and you'll notice in this scene his proportions are quite exaggerated to complement the movement. The action is dynamic, well animated, and well crunchy. Yeah, there's quite a bunch of blood and gore here that you didn't really find in the original. I'm normally not a big fan of serious and realistic designs of old-school cartoony characters, but Inspector Tanaka looks pretty great here. Perhaps because, increased detail and a more lifelike and organic look aside, he still looks charmingly cartoonish and stylish. Azuma looks pretty much perfect, and Sachiko looks alright. Professor Tani's design, though, is quite bad and barely even recognizable. I had no idea it was supposed to be him until the characters pointed it out. Another visual nitpick would have to be the way they chose to portray 8-Man's speed visually. At times, it can look kind of odd, less like he's actually dashing about at superhuman speeds and more like he's just become temporarily invisible. The absolute height of 8-Man's action animation in the OVA, though, is this extremely Kaneda-esque fight sequence. Its snappy sense of motion fits the character's dazzling pace and agility perfectly. The colors are both vivid and downplayed, giving everything a flashy look, yet toning it down a bit to still give the whole thing a somewhat down-to-earth air, instead of going for full 90s garishness. In fact, the only part that does would be the black kid's outfit, and it actually makes perfect sense for a kid in that decade to be dressed like that. Throughout most of the show, the story does add to the entertainment value, but I still found it to be a big waste of potential in the long run. It feels like there were going to be more episodes, but they decided they'll never get the money for it, so they threw together a very rushed ending. I don't know if that's what actually happened, but it definitely feels like it if you watch it today. I should have probably mentioned this earlier, but this OVA does not star the same protagonist as the original 8-Man. Instead, it's a new protagonist named Hazama who takes over the 8-Man body after Azuma's mysterious disappearance. There are some hints as to what happened to Azuma's consciousness, and it's tied into an overall theme of no-nonsense brutality versus pure heroics. The new protagonist has some traumatic memories of a corrupt, brutal cop, and as a result, he hates the police. Yet as soon as his consciousness is transplanted into the 8-Man body, he goes absolutely fucking nuts on the bad guys. His character arc is trying to be all about learning to become a true hero and control his rage towards those that trigger a violent instinct inside of him. And while it comes awfully close to succeeding and the subtle little glimpses of change in his behavior are satisfying to watch, I don't feel that it was cemented as well as it could have during the final episode. The final battle is followed up with a very inconclusive ending that just screams we were going to release more episodes of this, but it turns out it just didn't sell that well. Once again, I'm just taking a shot in the dark and I could be wrong, but I suspect 90s otaku just weren't that huge on the 8-man license. On the plus side, the characters are quite engaging anyway. The protagonist's little friend is charming, and his has-been football player dad is the best and most relatable character. He's got the best character arc, a surprisingly emotional redemption story, and also some touching little moments. I enjoyed watching 8-Man After overall, and I definitely consider it above average and worth a recommendation. But the flaws are still a pretty big shame, as with some tinkering and perhaps an extra episode, it could have been an absolute classic. I think Discotek would have been better off licensing the Blu-rays of the original first before the After OVA. I still think the original is the absolute classic and this one is just a nice little extra.